Most people think that negotiation is about being tough or getting the lowest price. The problem is that mindset often leads to short term wins and long term problems. In real estate, especially multifamily investing, negotiation is a relationship skill. It's about finding common ground, protecting your downside, and moving deals forward. Today, John and I are going to be breaking down the 6 negotiation skills every real estate investor needs to master. John, it's great to be here with you.
So good to be here, Mark. It's a big topic, right? There's a lot of opinions around good negotiating style, but in my experience, it is about that relationship, right? And what I found, spending so much of my career in residential real estate, now commercial, is it's a very small world. And over time, it just continues to shrink. In other words, the long term players stay around, but many come and go. And so it's important that you craft win-win deals, but also make sure you're looking out for your own interests, right? Just the same. So it's a big topic. So I'm looking forward to diving in today.
Yeah. Yeah. Negotiation, you see it on Instagram, you see it on Facebook, these shorts that, these guys that go in and they're, hair slicked back and they look like expert negotiations. And it's like, yeah, I got one over on that guy. It's like the real world, the big deals, it's a matter of making them win-win and truly understanding what's important to the other side. And then, really asking a lot of questions. The best negotiators that I've seen and that I've done deals with, they've just been excellent at asking the right questions. Now, before we get going, if you like investing into real estate and you're a high net worth investor that would like to make 5 to 7% cash flow and 20% annual returns, check out fulloutinvesting.com. We do have limited spots in our upcoming deal. And if you do want to partner with us, you can earn those kind of returns as that's what our deals are projecting moving forward. So go to fulloutinvesting.com and check us out.
That's right. Yeah. So, negotiation, it comes up almost every day in our business. And it could be everything from negotiating an actual deal to, due diligence request items or negotiating with a vendor, right? Maybe our property management company. As we add more properties, we look to negotiate our fees. And so, it's a skill that anybody, I think, in whatever career you're in, should practice and learn some of these skills. It's applicable across industries, but very specifically, you need these skills in real estate to be successful. Your purchase price, as I mentioned, your due diligence terms, the scope of work, fees, et cetera. We got to protect our downside, but also unlock upside. Weak negotiators at the end of the day, Mark, they just really lose credibility, overpay, and sometimes just miss out on the deal entirely. So these skills are critical for really, once again, anybody, but specifically anybody looking to invest in real estate. So looking forward to diving in.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that the relationship building side of it can be looked at, oh, that's weak. And the reality is that the relationship side of it is looking at the long-term business perspective side of it. And what's interesting as you start doing, I mean, John, you and I, we've negotiated thousands of sales through the years. And we've trained a lot of people to do that as well. And what's interesting in the fact of negotiation is that not everything is the same amount of importance for we'll just say, two parties. So there can be two different important factors there. And the only way to truly understand what's important on the other side is to ask the right questions.
That's
And
right.
so, in any sort of, we'll say, negotiation, starting with the relationship side of it, that, let's humanize the experience first. There were some studies done, and the negotiators that took a minute or two and actually built some rapport, and they connected at that human level, they were able to actually get better results at the end of the day versus like just going right in for the kill. Because the reality is if you go in for the kill, the other person's back is up, and
Yeah.
you got like fist to fist, and you're going, you're going toe to toe, instead of, okay, let's become humans here first, and try to create some connection. And then it's much easier to try and structure a win-win deal at that point. And so this is not what we're talking about today, is not weak. This is about getting the best deal overall and to maintain relationships. So moving forward, you can do deal after deal after deal for the long term and win big in real estate.
It's such a critical component, Mark. And I remember back at my days at Mark Spain Real Estate, I would tell agents all the time, you might go in, for example, with an offer saying, we're going to close in 3 weeks, thinking that that's really going to wow the seller. And oh my God, they're very serious. They're going to close quickly. That's great. But maybe they haven't found their next home yet. And actually having a little
Yeah.
more time would have been helpful for them. And all of a sudden, before you know it, they've selected another offer with a 60-day closing timeline simply because you failed to ask the question, what's important to the seller? Right. And so it's no different in commercial real estate. We've worked with some sellers that want certainty of closing above and beyond anything else. So timing isn't a big a factor for them. They just want to know if we go under contract with you, you're going to close. So things like maybe some hard earnest money or some terms that, allow for them to have some, compensation if the deal falls apart, is more enticing them to then a fast timeline. We've had situations where they're looking to place their capital in another deal and haven't yet found that deal. So a little more timing could be helpful. So, dangerous is right whenever you're making assumptions, right? The old saying, whenever you assume, you make a, what out of you and me, right? And I think it's just important to slow down and ask those questions. And, you mentioned the humanization component, but it's funny. We've had a number of these buyer interviews where we're being interviewed by the seller as a potential buyer, and you always start off with a little bit about who they are, what they're up to, where they live, and we've had some resistance. I remember one group in particular that was like, okay, like let's just get to it, and that's okay. But guess what? That taught us something in and of itself, that these guys are all business, no nonsense. So let's just cut to the chase, keep our answers short and sweet and to the point, and that's probably what they'll respond to. So you learn something even when they resist it, because it just tells you a little bit about their behavior style and the type of business they like to do. So 100%. And, I look forward to those buyer interview calls. Not every operator does them, but what a great opportunity to get to know. And we're working on a challenging structure right now. We don't know if we've won the deal, but the seller had some unique requests. And because we built some rapport and now we've had 2 or 3 follow-up conversations, and I wouldn't say we're friends, but like it's just easier to talk through challenges because it's like I know a little bit about them. We both want the same thing. They want to sell, we want to buy. How do we bring it together? Whether it works out or not, it's just made those conversations much easier that we took the time just to get to know them a little bit.
Yeah.
It's empathy at the end of the day, right? Like what's
Yeah.
important to them. And I think this really what is the key factor here as we're talking, but it's number one rule of the, I'd say the 6 negotiation skills. It's like you got to know what your walk away point is, right? So if you go into negotiation without that, and then you're talking win-win, you may overpay. But if you know what your limits are, we're not going above this price, or we're not going to walk away from this term. It's super important to us. You know what those things are and how much risk you can take on. If you meet a point where you just simply can't get past it, that's okay. You gave it your best and it's fine. But knowing that walk away point is critical. And then you build those relationships and you have those conversations and you ask those questions. And maybe you find out it's just not going to happen. But at the end of the day, at least you have a conversation and you built a relationship, and that may lead to a future opportunity. So, I think about it like, right, Mark, because often you get put into highest and best on these deals, and something does happen psychologically where you want the deal.
Yeah.
And before you know it, if you're not careful, you're like,
Yeah.
well, what if we bumped it up $1 million or 500,000? And so that's another factor. I think having a solid team around you, our 5-person investor committee meeting, someone's going to speak up if somebody, if 2 or 3 of the group are getting too aggressive and say, hold on, guys, I don't think so. Right. And so I think that's another factor, knowing that walk away point, and then being in a culture where everybody's comfortable speaking up if they think we're getting beyond that walk away point. Right.
100%. And so, yeah, I mean, when we ever go into a deal, there's 2 things we want to know. You nailed it. The first one is know your walkway point, or know what's important to yourself. I think that's a big thing that real estate investors, they'll go into a deal and they haven't actually slowed down and asked themselves the question, what is most important to me in this deal? And like write it down and get clear. If you work with a team or a partner, make sure that you're both on the same page there of what is important to us on this deal. It might be price, it might be closing date, it might be the amount of earnest money you put down. Maybe you don't have a lot of cash, or maybe you are not comfortable going hard day one with your money. Maybe it's the inclusions that is part of the overall deal. You want something that's like really important to you. That'd be more on the residential side, but ultimately it could be making sure that you have all the documentation, the financial numbers, everything is being provided to you, because you see some holes. And if you don't ask for it and get, complete transparency on that, that's a massive red flag for you. But the point there is getting very clear on what is important, and it's not just always about price.
Right.
John, you nailed it. The price is a very important factor because it's easy to get emotional right at the end. You're competing against 25 offers. They narrow it down to five, and then they're in three, and then it's down to you and somebody else, and it's like, oh, you just need to put $500,000 more down, and you got the deal. It's like, it's easy just to say yes. And this is something that we trained our agents on through the years. It's like you get right to the very end and you have a buyer, you have a seller that are at like landlock, and they're not quite getting there. And then you have the other agent, and the other agent says, well, if you just throw in the commission, and we're going to get a deal together. Well, that's not always the best option at that point. Sometimes you just got to let them work it out. That's more from an agent perspective, but getting clear what your price is and what your walkaway point is, and all these other details as well. Maybe you've given them the closing date, you've given them the terms that they want. Yeah, you've gone in super hard on your money, like hard on your mind, hard as in day one. You're not going to be able to get your deposit back if you do the inspection and there was issues. Okay, so it's committing. So maybe you're willing to do that, but your price is like, this is my walkaway price.
Yeah.
So getting clear on that ahead of time is really important. And then the second part we had briefly discussed as well is like finding out what is important to the seller before we even draft an LOI, John. Like we're on the phone with the broker and saying, okay, what's important? What's the seller looking for? Why they're selling? A lot of times we know that already why they're selling, but we want to know the flexibility, what's important to the other side first before we even draft the offer. I can't tell you, John, how many times I would just have an offer just show up.
Oh yeah.
And in my email, I'm like, who's this even from? And I had no idea. And now at the point where I was representing the seller when we were, selling homes, I would then call the buyer broker, and I would find out a little bit more about the buyer. I'd be doing the job from the other end, but the broker that sent in the buyer offer, he should have actually called me first and said, okay, what's important to the seller? But he missed the step. And so those two parts, I think, are so overlooked when it comes down to negotiating real estate deals, and it gives you such a major advantage.
What's wild, Mark, is that we both shared that story, right? Because we had the same thing happen all the time. Offers just show up, and there were times where say post pandemic, when the rates were still 2 and 3%, we were getting 50, 60 offers on a deal, and guess what? Sometimes emails go to spam, and it's like
Yeah.
nobody ever calls, and you didn't
Yeah.
even know the offer was there, right? And so it's just such a small thing, but gosh, in commercial real estate, Mark, operators do that to the brokers just the same. They just send over an LOI, never even call the broker, never even have a conversation. And, gosh, just from a due diligence perspective, Joe Lowry, our acquisitions director, probably talks to the broker 5 and 6 times through the process before we even decide to submit the LOI, getting clarification on the roof's age. Most of these buildings that we're buying have 8, 10, 13 different standalone buildings. And so one roof might have been replaced, but 3 might not have. And so just getting that clarity. So, that makes me so nervous for investors that may be investing in deals where the operator never even got clarity on those questions. But besides that, it's like, hey, I'm submitting this LOI. Before I hit send, just wanted to find out, is there anything that the seller has on their mind that I should be thinking about and incorporating into my offer? Is timing more important? What's the most important thing, right? And a good broker might just say, look, it's price and surety of close. But that in and of itself tells you something. It's like, let's keep the offer clean. Let's, try to close as tightly as possible, show proof of funds, whatever it takes to win that deal. And I think another factor here too is when you have those conversations along the way with the broker, you're also letting them know what you're seeing, right? So, this would be point number 2, anchoring the conversation early, right? So facts and logic, not emotions and
Mm.
feelings. So, hey, I see that your seller's looking for 185 a door here. We just closed the deal 3 months ago down the street at 165 a door with a similar vintage. Help me understand how you got to that pricing, and let them talk and say, well, what we're seeing in the comps is this. So if I submit an offer reflective of those, recent comps that I just shared with you, is that something that you think your seller would appreciate? So, it's interesting because you're balancing relationships, which does have a little bit more of an emotional component to it, but you have to keep everything grounded in facts and reality, right? It's not about feelings. It's about, this is just what the market's saying. And we had a deal recently. I mean, the seller was looking for, say, I'm going to make this up, I don't want to, reveal, anybody, but they were saying like 42 million, and we thought it was worth like 38. But in conversations with the broker, they're like, we're seeing the same thing. The seller sees that. Just go ahead and submit. So you find out a lot. These brokers will never, in my experience, cross the line, but they'll at least give you the intelligence you need to make it easier for their client to get a win-win deal. Right. So they'll answer those questions, but it's all about facts and logic when it comes to that anchoring of the conversation.
Yeah, no, that's so well said. Like being the market expert, you just instantly get respect.
Yeah.
And the one that asks the questions, they're in control of the conversation.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times as an operator, you are, constantly talking, trying to justify how much you know. But the
Yeah.
reality is like a quick fact and then follow up with a follow up question and coming from a place of curiosity, not a know it all. Definitely not
Yes.
a know it all because that, if you're trying to like show up the other person or prove to them that they're wrong, that's a never win situation. It's not about that. It's like, here's what we're coming up with. You said it perfectly, John. Help me understand how you were able to come up with that.
Yeah.
We're curious here on that. And, I think that's a very strong part when you are negotiating, especially these larger deals. But this helps with any sort, even if you're negotiating your residential, home that you're purchasing for your family. You want to make sure that you're asking the questions and you're coming from a place of being an expert. So you're doing your research ahead of time, and then you're validating what you've been able to come up with, because the truth is that the broker might share some information that you had no idea about. And so that's very, very helpful when it comes down to negotiating deals.
Well, if you're listening to this and maybe you're newer in your career or newer to negotiation, what Mark just said there is such a gold nugget. He who asks the question controls the conversation. Like, that is such a critical thing that I've learned, just curiosity, asking questions. And sometimes you might be surprised at how much people reveal, right? But at the end of the day, it is about, when I say control, that almost sounds bad, but it's like you're leading the conversation and you're helping people
Mm,
get to where you need them to be. It's kind of that, how to win friends and influence people 101. I mean, that was Dale Carnegie, right? He who asked questions. I would say a second one, which is actually our third key negotiation tactic, is embrace silence, man.
yeah,
Silence is golden.
yeah.
And we used to train our agents at Mark Spain Real Estate about this. And when we would role play, it was almost like how long can you sit there without talking, right? And what I found is when you have a point to make, or you're, at a point in the negotiation where you just not putting your foot down, but you're saying, this is where we're at, ask for what you're asking for and shut up. Silence is something people become afraid of, or it's like, you hear about uncomfortable silences in a conversation, but in negotiation, embrace that silence. When the other party's not responding, guess what they're doing? They're thinking. And you talking will interrupt that thinking and get them off of that thought process. And how many great negotiations were ended without even the person knowing, because they just couldn't stand a 5-second silence. And it's funny. I've had situations where it felt like I was sitting there for 5 minutes in front of the seller, saying, "Are you ready to list at this price?" But and now we're sitting here for a couple of seconds. I want to keep talking, but just sit there and let's just let them process it. Let
Yeah.
them make that decision. Let them fill that space. In other words, and what can happen if you're not careful is you talk past the sale. Right? You just keep talking and try and reinforce your position, and now you frustrated the other party. So state your case, facts and logic, present your question, and just be quiet and wait. Do you embrace that philosophy, Mark? That kind of silence
Oh,
and yeah,
it's
yeah,
gold. It's golden. It really is. And you nailed it. Is the other person is processing the information, and they're trying to figure it out. And that extra space that you're giving them, it's coming from a place of loving on them is
yeah,
where it's at. And so it's letting them process it and being okay in that silence. I think that encourages them to be able to make a decision in that moment. And not many will say, you know what, that's actually good. Let me think about that and get back to you. uh, Many will just make the decision right there, and that's the goal, is to be able to move the negotiation forward at that point. And so it's a tactic that, I'm not even like a fan of a tactic. It's a we'll say it's a part of the negotiation that you get better at the more you do. and
Yeah.
that builds more confidence. If it's your first negotiation that you're doing, it's going to be a little bit harder to do that. But the more confident you are in being that market expert with doing your research and truly understanding what it is you're negotiating and understanding what is important on the other side, understanding what's important on your side, and just knowing your numbers, that's part of this as well, going to, the numbers and knowing your facts. I'm kind of backtracking a little bit, but when we're negotiating, John, that we do hard quotes with our insurance, that we have a from a tax perspective, we have a third party consultant actually give us numbers of what he expects the taxes to be when we close. Like, this is something when we were in our best and final recently, John,
Yeah.
he was like, "What are your numbers for this?" And we're actually telling them, he's like, "Are those hard numbers? As in, like, have you like settled on that? Is that what the numbers are going to be?" Is like, yes, because that we know those up front shows the seller and the broker that we're ahead of the game, and that means that there's not going to be a potential, oh, by the way, taxes are higher than we thought, we're going to blow the deal up now, because we already got ahead of it. And we did this before the broker even asked us to do it. It was so that knowing your numbers, becoming a market expert, it kind of pulling it back down to the silence part of it, that helps you be more confident in the negotiation as well. Because the last thing you want to show is this idea that you're like neediness, that I need the deal. And so if you're confident and you're able to have that silence, ask a good question, let them process, that will position you as we'll say, a very strong negotiator.
That's right. Knowing your numbers, man, so critical. And, it goes back to, we touched on this earlier, but that empathy. So the seller's going, if I accept this buyer's offer, are they going to close? Are they going to retrade? Are they going to delay the closing and ask for more time at the last minute? There's a lot of fear that they're going through because, these are big deals and they have investors and they made promises to those investors, right? So they want to get those numbers and hit those returns. And so, in a sense, some of that's not our problem in terms of what their investors are going through, but understanding where they're at by getting those hard insurance quotes and having, Ryan Tax pull this, analysis. I mean, it costs $1,000. It's not free. We pay for this. It's just that peace of mind that we're giving the seller that, look, we're confident in our numbers.
Yeah.
We are going to close if we get this deal done. So, it's a benefit to our investors and to our company to have those numbers. And we know our underwriting's tight. So it just makes sense to do it. But we're also, by in turn, helping the seller because they're seeing, okay, these guys have really thought through everything. So I'm removing some fear from the situation that they're naturally going through. In today's market, Mark, I mean, upwards of 70% of deals that go under contract are not closing. There's retrades at the last minute and the seller says, pound sand, or the buyer can't raise the funds, or their financing falls through. So the brokers and the sellers are going through a lot of effort and work and not closing in a lot of cases. And so all that fear is present while they're having these conversations, right? So if we can help alleviate some of that fear while still protecting ourselves and our downside and our risk, why wouldn't we do it? But so many operators don't. It's the reason why they ask the question, because half the operators are like, well, we're estimating X, but it might be a little bit different. And one thing we found in this business, man, I mean, even on the seller side, when we're the buyer and we've done everything right, sometimes at the last minute, they try to throw a charge your way or try to hold you, your feet to the fire. Unfortunately, that is a reality in this business. And so, the more preparation you do on the front end, the easier it is to avoid those unexpected conversations or situations, right? And that was really number 4, right? Understanding what the seller really wants. We sort of just covered that. Their certainty, their timeline. So this is another big one that should go without saying, but put everything in writing immediately, right? I mean, we don't just call the broker and say, we're thinking of offering this. We put out an LOI. There's been situations where on one deal, we've submitted 4 LOIs because throughout the conversations, terms change or little thoughts change. And instead of just saying, hey, just think on it and let us know, we just put it on in writing, because at the end of the day, if the seller gets excited, they can just sign that. But if they get excited and they don't have paperwork, and then 24 hours goes by and another offer comes swooping in. That was something we had a conversation with our team on recently, Mark. And it's not criticizing anybody on the team, but they were like, well, I'll just call the broker. And you and I were like, no, we're going to get it on paper and send it over because God only knows what could happen between now and tomorrow. A high flying offer comes in at the last second. Let's get it in their hands and get it signed. No delay. So always have things in writing. I think it's just so critical. I don't mind sharing when we were first on one of our first deals, we had kind of a handshake agreement on something and it was very small. It was, in terms of the deal, not even really meaningful. But at the last second, the seller said, "We're not paying it," and it was just like, gosh, how do we make that mistake? It was a small thing, but that lesson was so learned, it'll never happen again. Everything in writing, no matter what.
Yeah, and I think it's just good practice that when you have a conversation, you follow up with an email. Hey, John, it was great. It was great chatting with you. Just want to confirm, we talked about this and this, and here's what we decided next steps being.
That's right.
Like that it's just like in meetings, who's doing what when? Who's doing what when?
Yeah.
When you're running a company and you're in a meeting, at the end of the meeting, everybody should know what it is that they're doing. Like what are the next action steps? I can't tell you how many times in the past we've learned a lesson. You're on a meeting and it's like there's like 10 different action items, but there's no recap at the end. And
Yeah.
and so like just taking a minute and say, okay, who's doing what when? And you actually document it and you'd be surprised. Or like, oh, do you got that or do I have that? And so if you don't do that at the end of the day, it's very easy for there to be, we'll say, uh, potential missed opportunities there for
Yeah.
actioning on it. And then, you get off and you follow up a week later, like, hey, was that done? And they come back like, oh, I thought you were doing it. And it's like this is just it's more of an amateur move. So who's
Yeah.
doing what when? So when you're on negotiating with the broker, this is where even like a follow-up email. I think this is a big one that I had to learn the hard way, John, just quickly. I remember being multiple offer situation and I believe there was 5 other offers on the table. I was representing the seller as the agent. And I know we're flip flopping between being the operator, being the buyer or seller, and
Yeah.
then the agent as well. But I think it all ties together. I think this perspective from both sides becomes very important. Makes you a better negotiator. So there was about 5 offers on this, and the one broker that was representing a buyer, he called me and said he was asking me some questions, and I told him how many offers. I told him verbally how many offers were on the table. And the negotiation happened. We ended up selecting a different offer, and and then after the fact, he came back and said, "Oh, he's like, I didn't realize that there were 5 offers on the table." And I said, "Well, I told you on the phone that." And he's like, "Oh no, I didn't." He actually filed a RICO complaint on me. I'm
Oh,
like,
geez.
"Oh, I learned my lesson. I
Yeah.
should have. That was my bad. I should have." After the conversation, after I told him, because I know I verbally told him,
Yeah.
I should have sent the email and say, "Hey, just confirm, there's 5 other offers on the table and, we're going to be doing it this time. All the best." And so in the email after, what that does is it protects you. It protects you of any of the I forgot or I'm not doing it, because even if it's not legally binding say if it's an email, it's not on a contract, most people will keep in integrity with what was agreed upon in an email. But if there's no email, the verbal is easier to break. But the email is harder because people, they want to be fair and they want to maintain integrity. And if there's an email of them agreeing to it, not many people will break that, in my
That's right.
experience.
That's right. I mean, the memory is so malleable. This is kind of an interesting example, but when they look at wrongful convictions where people are convicted for a crime they didn't commit, the majority of them are a direct result of eyewitness testimony. So, in other words, somebody said, I saw that guy do it, and that person did not do it, right? So, it just shows how just over time
Mm.
memories get clouded and new information comes in. And, maybe that broker had 7 conversations that day about different offers and different deals, and just his mind, stuck that comment about the multiple offers on another deal. And, in his mind, I didn't hear it, but you said it. But how do you prove it? So, those email recaps, in fact, that's one of our fundamentals that at the end of every conversation, we send a recap email. Here's what we discussed. Here's what the next steps are. So, once again, this is great beyond just negotiations. It's just great management, right? Relationship or operational management. So, I would say just to wrap it up, the 6th thing is be firm but friendly. At the end of the day, like you can be tough without being toxic, and I think that's the key factor here. It's like we're not willing to do that, but here's what we can do. versus like, we're not doing it. And if you don't agree to this, we're walking away tomorrow, you know? And gosh, you know, we've had a lot of these calls where even when it didn't work out at the end of it, the broker's like, man, you guys were so easy to work with. Sorry it didn't come together, but I'm going to make sure I find you a deal, you
Yeah.
know? And so, you know, that's what you're looking for. If it doesn't work out, it's at the end of the day, did I leave the people feeling good regardless? And if so, that will benefit us down the line, right? So tough without being toxic is kind of my motto there. It's just, you know, hey, this is what we're willing to do. We're not willing to do that. Can we come together? You don't have to be rude or ugly about it. You know, at the end of the day, it's there's other deals out there. As we always say, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. We'll find another deal. So, you know, let's leave the other side at least feeling like we were easy to work with and we stood our ground and we were, you know, strong where we needed to be, but just not ugly or rude about it.
Yeah, well said. So to recap, here's some situations that you might need to negotiate in. So first off, it's pretty straightforward. You're negotiating a deal. Okay, you're a buyer, you want to buy an investment property, you're negotiating the deal. That's pretty straightforward. Next is during due diligence, after you do the inspection, you might need to negotiate at that point. Maybe you found something that was outside the scope of what was disclosed to you. You might need to negotiate on that. You might need to negotiate and you want some seller credits there for some repairs done versus, say, money. And so that's another negotiation there. Negotiating with lenders. So you are getting a few quotes, and it's not just on the percentage rate, but terms, what your prepayment penalty is, and just making sure that the terms are what you want. And so that could be a negotiation as well. Contractor bids, this is definitely a negotiation
Yeah,
part. Say there's any change orders and they're coming back and they're saying a price, like being on the ball when it comes down to the numbers that are given can make the difference if you hit your numbers, your projected investor returns or not. Or perhaps it's actually structuring the deal with your investors as well. So
yes,
you draft the investor deck, and you're getting pushback from investors. You need to be able to clearly communicate the why behind that. And so there's lots of different scenarios that you are negotiating when you are doing real estate. And the flip, I mean, if you're selling a property, then you have all those opportunities just in the other seat as
that's right.
well. And so I think that understanding what we're talking about, and we're playing this a few times and truly like working on that, I think will help you not only close more deals, but you'll be able to sell more properties for more money, make more profit in your pocket, and just make the whole game more palatable, more enjoyable. Because, John, I've seen some brokers through the years and some deal makers that were just so tough. It was like pulling teeth trying to do deal with them. They generally don't hang around for too long because it grinds and it wears on them, and you can see it in their face. And so the approach that we're taking and the approach that we've shared here with you, if you adopt this methodology, you'll be able to stay in the real estate game long term and do exceptionally well.
That's right. Yeah, so just to recap our negotiation at Ferris Capital, right? We go in prepared. We know our numbers. We have the comps. We have all of our construction quotes, our insurance, our taxes. We stay calm even when things get like, you know, tight, right? The deal is on the line. It's a long game. It's not, you know, it's not just win this one deal. It's win many deals over many years, right? So we may do another deal with that same seller in the future. Certainly, we'll do other deals with that broker in the future. And what you'll find in this business is if you make a broker's life difficult and they have 3 or 5 offers and best and final, and the seller says, which one I take, they're looking at which ones are easier to work with. So if you're difficult, you may be, you know, that broker may advise the seller not to take your offer. And, you know, the best deals come from smart, thoughtful negotiation, not through brute force or, aggressive negotiation tactics. It's just knowing your numbers, calmly presenting them, knowing your walk away point, and crafting a simple, easy deal that meets your needs and hopefully the seller's needs.
Yeah, well said. So know your numbers, know what you're willing to walk away with, what that walk away point is, understand the person across the table from you, and then solve to make it an actual win-win situation. The best real estate investors are the best negotiators as well. So this is something that it's not only the deal they're negotiating, but there's many other things that they're negotiating as well. And so if you do these things, it will help you land more deals and put more money in your pocket and more in your investor's pocket as well. And if you are interested in taking a look at our next deal, go to fulloutinvesting.com, learn a little bit more about how you can get 20% annual returns and 5 to 7% cash on cash flow that's coming to you on a regular monthly basis as well. Go to fulloutinvesting.com. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share the channel with other high net worth investors that you think will benefit from it. Thanks for tuning in to the Multifamily Investor Playbook. We love and believe in you guys. Keep dreaming and investing big.